All right, so I wanted to talk about some of the things that were on my mind. And earlier, I was having a conversation with my close friend, and the thing came up that I'd thought about a while ago, which is essentially that who we are is not determined by the people of this world. Who we are in the eyes of other people is not who we are to God. So, and even if you don't really believe in God, it still doesn't really change the fact that what you are is what you are, and what you are not is what is not what you are not. And so, for me, I think this is important, and an important realization, because I've often had a really difficult time expressing my inner world, to the outside world, partially because, English was my second language that I learned at 11 years old, so that sort of stunted my communication abilities, and I sort of had to learn English on the fly in a really abrupt and sort of disturbing circumstance. And so I had this profound, inner world that I was unable to communicate to the world, and I did my best to present myself as authentically as I could to the people around me, but I could always sense that people sort of want to, they want to know, what we call it pigeonholing. We want to quickly identify something and then say, okay, you're part of this category. You are this type of person. You are that type of person, So people have this desire to, sort of choose your identity for you. And if you're someone doesn't really fit, any of those categories, it won't stop them from finding some fucking outfit for you that doesn't really fit you really well, but then they'll still grin at you and say, oh, look at you, you're wearing a cowboy outfit, you're a cowboy now. So and this is part of what has interfered with my self-esteem is, sort of trying to honor, what other people's expectations were of me. And so, we all sort of get accustomed to this thing that people call, our personality. They say, Jeb over there is this type of guy, and I expect that type of behavior from him, And then, if Jeb sort of acts out of character, they get kind of annoyed and feel well, he's not being himself today or something like that. What happened to Jeb? Somehow he's not being who he usually is. Where did that Jeb go that I used to know? And so rather than really being interested in who Jeb is, it's they couldn't be more eager to get Jeb to fall back in line to what they're familiar with. And so I think part of what drives some of my what might be considered shyness or reluctance to really have a lot of relationships is because I don't really want a lot of relationships with people who aren't really interested in who I really am, and they just kind of want to be okay, yeah, he's into this kind of stuff, so he's that type of person. And so we can talk about these sort of, common interests. But, we're not really like communing, we're not really, getting to know each other on a deeper level, And I was listening to a video last night where a young woman was talking about, sort of like the difference between mysticism and, like mysticism versus like normal religion, I guess. And sort of mysticism, which I would sort of, identify more with mysticism in the sense that mysticism is more about like getting to know God and becoming closer to God, whereas like, what most people consider religion is more of like a utilitarian means to an end. So, like we do these practices and, we behave, we live under this certain creed, and we associate with these people within our community, and we're not really interested so much in getting closer to God, but we're like trying to participate as a member of, a respectable member of like the religious tribe that they're part of. So like religion is not so much about, really what is implied, which is, you're worshiping God, but you're not really worshiping God. You're doing it for some other, you're not really doing it for the purpose of really like sincere desire to know God, but you're doing it more to like satisfy whatever, whatever is convenient socially. And, and then there's like some overlap of like, there's some interest, but, it's like not so much that it's like a main driving force behind the whole thing. But, and then religious people get, very, religious people, often are very like, defensive about their religions. Like, as if it's like something that could be taken away from them. As if anything could be taken away from God, It's kind of ridiculous. So you realize like what it is that they're afraid of being taken away from them is something here in the material world. And, people who have a good relationship with God, know that nothing can really be taken away from them in this, temporary existence. And so this is sort of like me circling back to this idea of, what I like about mysticism is, it's like genuine desire for knowledge, for deeper insight into yourself, so that you're not really dependent on what the, transient opinions are of, the whatever sort of zeitgeist is of the people who happen to be occupying the same time and space, upon which you're visiting, your time here on Earth. And so, what is often, holds people back from really speaking the truth and, really doing what it is in their hearts that needs to be done, is, like this fear of what the people of this world will consider good and bad. But, only God knows. Not even you. You don't know what is good and bad. The knowledge of good and evil is not really the knowledge of good and evil. It's the knowledge of, my opinion is that this thing is bad and this thing is good. It's not really a knowing. Like, as human beings, we can't really know what is good and what is evil, because ultimately God, vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. So what does that mean? It means that justice, real justice, that doesn't really come from human beings. It comes from God himself. And so we sort of often put our fate not in the hands of what really is true about ourselves, but what perceptions are about ourselves. And we spend a lot of time calculating, well, if I behave in this way, then they'll think this way, but it won't really be that. It wasn't really what my real intent was, but that's how people will perceive it, so I won't do that thing. And so often we end up living in fear, and we end up not really saying the things that need to be said, because sometimes we just really we put so much weight on what is said nowadays, with social media and everything, and the internet and everyone, and the lynch mobs and the rabble that gets flips out about any sort of politically incorrect slightly thing. But people, to really get to know themselves, they really just have to really be able to explore and grow. They have to be able to try things on, say things, to hear what they sound like, and it's very hard nowadays to do that, because more and more communication is being done in kind of a public forum. And so everything is about perception. And so all these social media influencers, they become sort of captured by their audience, and they start invariably sort of pandering to whatever it is that they think is going to sell or give them views or whatever. And so often it's very easy to become despondent because of what other people end up believing about us. But it really doesn't really matter what situation we find ourselves in life, as long as we remember that whatever we are, we are what we are. And it's not a matter of our own opinion of what we think of ourselves. It's not an opinion about what the entire world thinks of us. The only thing that really matters is that God knows us. And regardless of what clothes we try to put on, God does not see our clothes. He just sees who we are. And it doesn't, nothing really that we do really changes who we are. And so, it's like what Jesus said about, a good, I think it's like a good tree determines, if the fruit is good, So if what you fundamentally are is a decent, loving person, no perception of the world will change that. Even if you've been bullied into, living a life where you're not necessarily able to function as the most kind and, sweet person that you really are, because, the circumstances don't really make it so that you're able to shine in the way that you want to. But God knows, God knows, what you are essentially, He sees the lambs and He sees the goats, and then He divides them. But, it's not a matter of oh, fuck, I hate these goats. It's just that's what they are, It's and, it's, the goats don't know that they're goats, and the lambs don't necessarily know that they're lambs. God knows who we are in the end. And so like when we can like stop carrying around all this weight of, you know, like this extra person in our mind who is like trying to govern, you know, what we look like to the world, and just sort of being just more in touch with, you know, what is it these drives and desires tell us in our body. You know, what is it really that it is in my heart, you know, that I want to grow, you know, like what is it, you know, whatever activity you do, if you have the intention that, you know, like I want to gain some greater knowledge about myself and closeness to the, you know, my true self, my prime self, you know, that which communes with God, you know, then every activity, you know, that brings you closer to God. You know, it's not for anyone else to say, you know, what journey, you know, that you need to embark upon, or what kind of, you know, trouble or mischief that other people, you know, see you getting into. You know, it's because it's not for them to decide, you know, what road that you needed to travel in order to find your way back home, essentially. So, yeah, and so like, you know, I've lost a lot of nights of sleep, and, you know, sort of ruminating back over like how, you know, my interactions went with this person, and, you know, how did I come off, and, you know, what do they think about me now, and like what have I done, you know, to the perception of myself in this relationship. And, you know, what I realize is, you know, I can't really control what other people think, and what is more important is like what my, you know, if my intention comes from a desire to essentially radiate and facilitate a greater sense of, you know, acceptance of what really is, you know. And as long as we don't accept what really is, then we're always going to find ourselves in conflict, you know, with what we consider to be reality, because there's some things just aren't going to fit into what, you know, what our primitive minds are able to really fathom. And so, you know, I'm finding, you know, greater peace in the sense that I don't really have to do anything in order to, you know, be what I am, but I am welcome and free to like explore and to find out, you know, what it is that I want out of this life by, you know, putting less pressure on myself, and especially not really relying on any like mortal authority here on earth. You know, there's no person here on earth that has a higher position than, you know, what it is that God put into you, and what God knows about you and me and everyone. And so I think I'll leave it here, but really wanted to get this said. I think it's a vital piece of knowledge, at least for myself. Yeah, have a good one.